and yes.
Cool. Without further ado, I invite the first speaker of the Affirming team to start today's debate.
When a social media platform and an entertainment platform is the primary way that our youth is the mental health awareness is spread amongst our youth and talked about, we know there is a problem in our society. Our path to victory will be by proving that TikTok's normalization of these conditions has actually harmed the people with them rather than help them. I will first give a comparative of our world before going into my first point about the normalization and the detrimental impacts of TikTok's normalization of this. My second point will be about how TikTok's awareness has actually taken the seriousness of these conditions away. And my third point will be about the social backlash and the impacts on this, which will require context later. For the comparative, in our world, without TikTok as the vehicle to talk about these issues, we see these issues get discussed with a far more serious manner and tone. We see them being discussed with the seriousness that they deserve and constitute. We see people getting their information primarily from schools where it is already taught, as well as from actual research from people that are accredited as neuroscientists, as the psycho guys. I can't pronounce them, unfortunately. And that they'll be taken more seriously when they actually have the bravery to speak up about their conditions. So let me get into my first point about the normalization of mental illness via TikTok and why it's detrimental. For some context, TikTok is primarily used by the youth of our society, primarily by teenagers and kids, who oftentimes lack critical thinking and whatnot to really extrapolate information about sorts of issues and often tackle them with a bit of insensitivity. I'm sure you've experienced this in your own youth, as you may be able to remember. As well as that, remember that not everyone with these conditions has the same needs. Everyone's mind is different, works in different ways, and thinks in different manners. So obviously, they will not always have the same treatment options available to them. So first of all, how does it get normalized by TikTok? Well, they get bombarded by often false variations of the conditions in the first place. These conditions are often bombarded because it's so trendy and cool to do so in the first place. So they get lots of views. So the people that do this ultimately just want to earn money by falsifying these issues just to make that profit off of TikTok. This means that for the normalization, that it makes people think that they can help because, you know, they see there's a video made by like some unqualified man who probably lives in his own basement, and he's talking about, here's the 10 things you can do to help people with this mental illness. Here's the 15 things you should try to do. These lists are not made by accredited like neuroscientists or psychologists. They're made by random people who have no qualification to talk about such in the first place. And they're ultimately doing it for the aforementioned need for money. They want to make money. This is why they're doing this. So people will think that they can actually like help their friends by following this, because as I've characterized before, teenagers often should take a more critical look at these sorts of content. They often jump to conclusions. My second point about the normalization of its negatives, it's triggering to people. Seeing people casually talk about very harmful things, things that people have struggled with to deal with as a person, can often be very detrimental. Seeing people casually say, oh, this test was so hard, I'm going to kill myself. Take a step back and think about what someone's actually saying in this context. And someone that's actually struggled with these issues, the normalization of it here is in such a negative way, like people just casually discussing how they want to die without actually wanting to get treatment for it. Just think about that. And to further go on to that, people just share these stories casually, like they're just most likely when they share these casually, sometimes they're doing it to be trendy, to fit in, stuff like that. So they don't actually have like that experience of actually having suffered from these conditions. Like They just want to fit in, look cool, suit the TikTok trend of the time. So what's the outcome of this? Well, people will start to underplay these conditions. People are less likely to believe people that actually have the bravery to speak up, because the way it's been normalized is it's just more of a joke, really. These people are more likely to get ignored when they finally have that confidence to speak up. This ultimately means they will feel isolated when they finally have that confidence to speak up in the first place. It means that nothing's going to be done to help them because they're just seen as like a joke. And additionally, without the normalization of treatment, but simply the normalization of their illness, when people do speak up and get taken seriously, it's not like people don't immediately default to trying to get treatment. They're just like, oh yeah, I also have that condition. Blimey. And they don't go and get treatment because it's not normalized. You don't talk about like, I'm actually getting treatment for this issue. It's very serious. It's not normalized. Whereas in our world, people actually care about these issues. When they're actually brought up with the brevity that they deserve, people will actually care about getting the treatment, helping the people that talk about them in the first place. Now to my second point about why TikTok awareness is actually taking the seriousness away. For some minor context, TikTok has no accountability at all. So they often do not get rid of people that like spread false information because it makes them money. They're a company, they want to make money. People click on false information because it's often like clickbaity, very poppy, you know? So TikTok is inherently an entertainment platform. People go onto it to find funny cat videos, quirky clips by people that are getting up to wacky shenanigans, and to follow their favorite celebrities. These are all short, snappy videos that ultimately do not like, they serve to entertain. When people see these lists in the same area as these sorts of things, they will view it as the same sort of entertainment. They will inherently devalue these conditions from seeing it as entertainment. And if they do not, if they view it as serious, well, first of all, they're just getting a bad take from someone who's not actually educated about the process. In the very unlikely scenario where they're likely getting a 30, 20-second long clip of someone discussing an issue for a very short amount of time. Whereas in our world, people getting taught about these at schools by researchers who are actually accredited, meaning that they actually get more information discussed to them in a relevant manner rather than seeing like a 20-second clip of someone who may not even be qualified talking about it. Now, why do people do this? As I've stated before, TikTokers want to make money, so it's all about that profit incentive at its core and how it's very popular to do so. So the outcome of this is, again, people will stop taking these conditions as seriously, so they might ignore people displaying the signs of people suffering from mental illness, or they might even just misdiagnose people suffering from them in the first place when you're getting all your information from an entertainment site that ultimately does not want to inform the average viewer. When it's viewed as such, it makes people feel especially isolated when they know that people are viewing them as like entertainment to laugh at, to like find a funny moment, just to profit off of it. Feels very dehumanizing to these people who are already suffering with mental conditions in the first place. I'll take one point now.
How do you support teenagers who are suffering with mental health issues in a conservative state where it is still an extremely taboo topic?
In a very conservative state where it's a taboo topic, just making it a joke does not really help the people in need. As I've stated before, it makes the outcomes worse. But additionally, there are other resources on the internet to try and get actual help rather than just TikTok, which is an entertainment platform. You can go to others like websites and sources that have actual qualifications. Now on to my final point about how social backlash against these individuals is actually worse. First of all, there's been a lot of social backlash against the people that falsify these conditions because it's seen as a very bad thing to do, like lying about something you suffer from, which is very serious for many people. People have seen that as very toxic, very bad, and they do not like it, so there's been social backlash. This means that people see this backlash, and sometimes you're not always 100% informed about the validity of like whether these people are actually suffering from these issues or not. So they might see this as people just hating on someone with the same supposed condition as them. In our world, this would not have ever occurred because there is no entertainment platform for this to actually happen on. The outcome of this is that you're less willing to talk about these issues. This looks like bottling them up, just not coming out and talking about them in the first place, rather just trying to take it on yourself. And you will not be willing to get treatment because you're scared of that backlash in the first place from the examples you've seen on social media in general. Thank you.
We thank the speakers for an excellent speech, and we invite the first speaker of the Negating team to present their news case.
Before the rise of TikTok, we were seeing people struggling with mental illnesses like depression and anxiety being sent to psych asylums, being labeled as these horrible things, claiming that they're not okay, who they are is wrong, and there's something inherently dangerous about these people. Before TikTok, we weren't allowed these casual conversations to ignite the mental illness awareness talks. 3 main points for you in today's debate. Firstly, how this increases awareness of mental illnesses. Secondly, how it can create a community not only for those living with mental illnesses, but those who don't, and can also support people that they know have some. And thirdly, the split point will be about the importance of being your own advocate. So firstly, I'd like to do some rebuttal. The affirming team's main point has been about how this normalization of mental illnesses is too casual, and it can be somewhat triggering. It can not make the situation as serious, and this doesn't provide an environment for people to feel brave enough to go to get that serious information. But I'd like to point out that they said that once they're brave enough, they will be taken seriously. But how are people actually supposed to feel brave enough to come forward about their mental illnesses if they're not offered that casual conversation to start realizing within themselves that maybe they are struggling? That about the normalizing it and it being too casual, therefore triggering towards people, these stories are the things that help people understand that they're not alone. They're stories that they can relate to, and they can kind of find someone that they can connect to on that level, so they understand that they're not the only person struggling, and they're not odd or wrong for having these emotions. They also said things like it's inherently entertainment platform, that TikTok was made for entertainment, and it causes people to view mental illnesses as a form of entertainment. And yes, we agree that TikTok initially started off as a form of entertainment, but as the youth has overtaken it, it has manifested into so many more things. It has turned into things like tutorials for people that don't know how to do day-to-day things. It has turned into places for education, and more importantly, it has turned into a place for people to go if they need support, if they're struggling with mental health. Now, moving on to my setup. Now, what do these TikToks actually look like? They look like influencers and just regular people displaying their day-to-day struggles when they are that are due to their disorders, their mental disorders that they may have. This looks like, for example, Uncle Tix displaying his tics on social media, showing people that this is what it's like to live with Tourette's, and people that have Tourette's can relate to this. It spreads awareness about the illness as well. There's also the misinformation. This gets dealt with by viewers, and especially by people that are also dealing with the same mental illness that this person is claiming to have, and they can easily debunk this by their own personal experiences. People know that it's just not true. And they can give a proper point of view of what it's really like. Now, what does the mental health awareness look like without TikTok? So TikTok is a unique platform because users tend to be the most open and honest on this platform compared to other media sources. It's like a combination of all media platforms all into one. So without this, we see people not getting accurate representation of people with mental illnesses because there isn't as much discourse around it. Now, to win today's debate, we need to prove to you that TikTok is the unique platform for this and the best platform to spread this mental health issue. Now, it's because of the insane engagement that TikTok actually gets. Millions and millions of people watch TikToks every hour. There's people from the Cayman Islands figuring out that they have Tourette's from watching TikToks. It's like, it's a global thing. Every age is watching it. Like, my mum goes and watches TikToks. It's not exclusive to anyone. There's also the unique algorithm that it has because it pushes the high, when you're engaging with something, it pushes that towards you even further. And if you watch a couple videos about a dog, all of a sudden you'll get only dogs on your algorithm. And this algorithm is what is unique to TikTok and what can provide people the sources they need. So now moving on to my first point about how this increased awareness of mental health issues. So for some context, having depression and having anxiety and having these general mental illnesses were seen as taboo, stigmatized, and uncommon before TikTok offered the opportunity to talk about it. So firstly, the TikTok algorithm caters to people with mental illnesses. So there's a higher engagement rate with these posts, which means they get a larger reach. They're also going to be spread out to people that aren't dealing with these mental illnesses. This will obviously lead to people getting more informed about how people are living with mental illnesses, how to treat people with mental illnesses, and how to deal with that sort of stuff. Secondly, this allows a personal connection to the mental health issue so that people can comprehend it better. Rather than a psychologist that has a very analytical and impersonal mind, they can't give you the true life experiences of someone struggling with mental illnesses, and they can't tell you how they actually directly infect people, whereas the platforms that people have on TikTok can do that. Thirdly, it creates conversations about it. Because it is such a large conversation being held on TikTok, with over 1 million searches for the hashtag mental illness, people feel more welcome to have this conversation. The taboo aspect that used to be there is no longer because of the normalcy that there is. Comparatively, it would be very stigmatized on the affirming side of the house. For example, mental health is seen as wrong. If you're depressed, there is something wrong with you and who you are. Lastly, people can now easily identify mental health issues in others. They're getting flooded with this information as well, and they're able to easily identify, oh, this person looks like they're struggling because I've seen something similar on my TikTok. It allows for them to gain awareness and being able to spread this information and support people that are struggling. The outcomes of this is because now that it is socially accepted, people feel more welcome to go and get diagnosed. They get the correct help that they need, because we do believe that a diagnosis is what is needed. That is the goal, so they can potentially get better. If people who aren't struggling, they can still consume this information, as I said before, so they have some understanding and they'll actually be able to support the family and friends that do struggle. Now, before I move on to my second point, I'll take POI.
Yeah, how does your side justify a notoriously misinformative ad as your most reliable means of normalization?
Well, we have recognised that there can be misinformation spread by individuals, but we also point out that since it is such a large community, the likelihood of that misinformation being seen as truth is very small, because of the fact that people are coming forward and calling out the people that are lying. Moving on to my second point about how this creates a community. So for some context, it's a big world, and living in more conservative and rural areas, the mental health issues have a sense of taboo over it. Kids are just told to get over it. It makes it hard for them to find a community. Now, if they're not getting diagnosed, they're internalizing it through believing that it's their fault and there is something wrong with who they are. So firstly, the TikTok algorithm allows for content to be delivered to those who are consuming it. So if someone is constantly watching videos about being depressed and having depression, they can to cope, TikTok will continue pushing these videos out. This causes people to have relate to the issue and form connections to those who also struggle. This is through TikToks and also comments. This is for people who don't feel comfortable posting. Now, secondly, if you want to post TikToks about your mental health issues, it allows you to realize how common they actually are through people that are engaging with your posts. They're commenting things, I relate, I support you, I help you, and this is likely to make you feel more comfortable. Thirdly, people are being open on TikTok about it encourages others to ask their real life friends for support. If you're being able to support your real life friends, you're being able to reduce the overall effects of mental health. Lastly, it allows people who aren't struggling to be it helps people who live in a small area. If you're in a place where mental health is not commonly talked about or known about, this can help you find that community where you can actually express how you feel. The outcomes of this is that people will be less lonely and they'll be less isolated because they have made friends from the community, and that is so significant for people struggling with mental illnesses. They need the support, they need people to lean on so that they can push through this and live a happy life. Thank you.
Speaker for their speech, and I invite the second speaker of the affirming team to further their team's case.
What NEG has done and what we must not do is confuse a world which is relatively accepting of mental illness that coincidentally has TikTok with a world where a relatively new app, TikTok, has removed stigma, made mental health an acceptable thing, and fixed that issue in society. Look, in my speech today, I've got 3 jobs. I'm going to start with some rebuttal through points of clash. Secondly, I'm going to split on the harms of monetization. And finally, I'm going to go over the comparative. What is the alternative to this world? What do we support on our side of the house? Look, firstly, on some rebuttal. At the end of the day, TikTok is filled with people who claim to be mentally unwell for clout reasons and people who are not medicating for it. The outcome of this is that people, people who actually are mentally unwell, think that it is fine to be mentally unwell and not medicate. Therefore, they think that it is still not okay for them to go and seek help in the form of medication, in the form of therapy, and when on their side of the house they don't get rid of the stigma, they just create even more harms for the key stakeholder of this debate, the people we should actually care about, mentally unwell people. Look, while you can normalize what is sometimes on TikTok a dubiously valid mental illness, TikTok alone will never be able to remove the stigma of medicating, remove the stigma of going to get treatment, and I'll talk more about relations to the medical industry in my split later on. Look, so the first point of clash through which I'm going to run some rebuttal is the alternative to TikTok, right? What we heard is that before we had TikTok, people were being put into mental asylums. Nope, they were being locked away because they were mentally ill. Look, I tell you there were two reasons why this happened, right? Firstly, we believe they were a danger to society, and secondly, we had fear around them. Both of these issues get fixed by three methods, by which I'll tell you about now. Look, no. So, firstly with research. And now that we have more research than we did in a world where we were locking away people for being mentally ill, we know that not only do they not pose a danger to society generally, but also we have no reason to be afraid of them. Secondly, as countries become more liberal, become more progressive, we have a more accepting society. Regardless of TikTok, we actually see more acceptance on either side of the house for mental illness. I'll get more into why we specifically regret TikTok later after my split. Look, and also the third reason for this is on media portrayals. You don't actually need TikTok in order to portray mentally unwell characters to the masses and therefore have all the benefits that your side is claiming. Look, the next point of clash through which I'll run some rebuttal is about normalization, right? You said that TikTok is just going to normalize this entirely, but what we tell you is that this normalization is actually often harmful. Look, you told us about in a conservative or a rural state that any normalization is good, and TikTok is one of the only ways to get this. In our response to a POI along the same lines, we told you that you actually just don't actually need TikTok specifically, because if you have access to TikTok, presumably you have access to the internet. You can see much better sources, and it's better for everyone. Look, even if we buy NEG's material about conservative states, we tell you that in a context where mental health is already trivialized, TikTok only makes it worse. If the people around you in this conservative or rural area are presumably also consuming these TikToks, it is just going to make them more likely to trivialize, to disrespect and dishonor mental illness as an issue. Now I'm going to move on to my split, but firstly I'll take a POI.
Given a community is essential for people to find coping mechanisms, how do you ensure a community for people suffering with mental health issues?
Yeah, sure. So community is important, right? I'll show you the alternative communities that we support specifically after my split when I get into some comparative. Look, so firstly, my split around the harms of monetizing this area of mental health and wellness, right? There are two ways that we see harms from connecting monetization to this rise in TikTok wellness. Firstly, people on TikTok, TikTok as a platform, as Riley said, is not accountable. There is no way to include your research, cite your sources. Therefore, it is incredibly likely, because there is profit incentive, that people are going to be spreading lies on TikTok. This can look like lies about mental conditions, misinformation, or it can also look like people saying, yeah, I have PTSD, I have anxiety, all this stuff. It can be incredibly harmful. So it allows fraud easily. But what are the harms of this, right? I'll take you an example. In America, we saw someone faking gender dysphoria to make a fundraising page. What are the harms of this? 3 harms. Firstly, it takes credibility from people who actually have gender dysphoria, actual trans people. Secondly, it takes money from generous donors who could otherwise be giving that money to a variety of other things, namely, someone who actually has a mental unwellness. And thirdly, it is often difficult to prove on TikTok if someone actually has a mental illness. You can't force someone to a doctor to have a diagnosis given to this person. Therefore, you have no accountability on TikTok, and there are so many harms with that. The second way that monetization is an issue when it comes to mental health is through companies profiting from this rise in people wanting to be diagnosed with a mental illness because they think that will make them relatable, they think it will get them attention and make them cool. Look, so how are companies going to profit from this? I'm not going to accept any material from the other side claiming that companies are not likely to profit, because we can prove that they have the opportunity, they have the motive, and also they have the means. So how do companies do this, right? Firstly, obviously they have a profit incentive, so they have an incentive to do this. What it looks like is Big Pharma selling drugs that don't work. What does this actually mean for people? People who are mentally well right from the start, who self-diagnose themselves after seeing a TikTok with 15 signs you definitely have ADHD. The people who are mentally well seeing this, take this medication, of course they think it works because the medication does nothing. What we see is this forms like an echo chamber, right? Because these people are likely to go back on TikTok, share their findings, say, yeah, I used to have ADHD, this medication worked wonders for me, I'm a mentally well person now. What this looks like is that then the people who are actually mentally unwell need to be supporting this help and should be the stakeholders in today's debate. These people find it so much harder to actually find drugs that work, to actually find drugs that aren't placebos, and to actually get help without stigma that is under the status quo. Right? So these are two specific harms that happens when you allow monetization to be connected to the rise in like content around awareness. I'll take another point if you have one.
No, not yet.
Awesome. Okay, bit of comparative, right? So in a world where we like regret TikTok, on our side of the house, we think it would be better where we regret TikTok content about like 10 signs you might have ADHD or my experience with depression, we need to promote some alternatives, right? So what is the comparative? We see that these people who go through the mental health system, who have experiences with mental crises, there is always going to be a need for them to share their experiences, always going to be a need for them to talk about it. And also on the other side of this, there is always going to be a need for these stories to be shared, right? This is how we achieved a world with little stigma and like all these big gains that we have made since the days when we were putting people in mental asylums for showing any signs of mental illness. I will remind you again, this is not connected to TikTok in any way. So what is the comparative? This looks like people going onto YouTube to share their experiences. I'll tell you why I think something like YouTube is inherently better than TikTok later, but what else can we see? We see things like the media, like people being put in movies, people like on the news. All this representation is inherently better than TikTok. Why is this? Because there are like 5 inherent harms to TikTok. Firstly, TikTok is made to be entertaining and snappy. Riley got onto this. This is inappropriate in a mental health context because you shouldn't be glamorizing, romanticizing it, making it like trying to hook you within the first seconds of seeing it. Secondly, TikTok is profit driven. These people have an incentive to just actively lie about it in a few different ways that I told you, and this is also incredibly inappropriate to associate with mental illness in a context. Thirdly, TikTok is not accountable, which again just helps the like promotion of blatant lies. Fourthly, it is uniquely insensitive because if you're seeing a video about someone who has an eating disorder, it is probably sandwiched like above that with a video of someone playing Subway Surfers and a video below that of like a cute cat or something. Therefore, TikTok is uniquely like desensitizing and taking the importance and decorum, brevity away from mental health. That is how we win today's debate when we show that TikTok uniquely has harms that they cannot claim. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for their speech and invite the second speaker of the Negating team to further their own speech.
Look, I think the problem with Affirmative case is that they acknowledge that this is a massive community, it has significant public support, and there is a lot of content on TikTok which is talking about mental illness, but they seem to assume that there is somehow no discourse contending with the sort of misinformation that they think is being spreading. Realistically, There are professional individuals and diagnosed individuals present on TikTok who actively have an incentive to contend with the misinformation that these people are trying to spread. But also, the misinformation that these people are trying to spread can't really be all that harmful, because otherwise they don't get the profit-driven stuff, but they also just don't get any sort of legitimacy. Firstly, on triggering content spread and how you still take it seriously. Secondly, I'm going to be speaking about why you're probably still going to seek a clinical diagnosis as the end goal, and also a little bit on why these harms that they spoke about only for TikTok aren't actually inherent. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about advocation within a medical setting. Firstly, on characterization, you're going to see people getting support from schools, etc. This relies on schools not only doing a good job, which I think is pretty easily contended, given the people teaching this would probably be probably older individuals. You wouldn't necessarily get a psychologist coming into every single school, because the mental health system within New Zealand is already pushed for resources. It's probably teachers teaching this kind of stuff, or at the least a separate organization. But this sort of thing is actually just not going to happen if it is not made clear on your side that these issues are common, and that this is something that parents and students actually want to hear about in a world when TikTok mental health content doesn't exist. We have not seen sufficient evidence that people are still going to care about mental health to the same extent when you do not have the public conversation that is promoted by the culture of TikTok. On triggering content spread, I think the lack of seriousness is unfortunately present in society regardless of TikTok. We have always heard stuff like, oh, I'm so OCD because I like washing my hands. We've heard this kind of information because there's a tendency for mental illness to be painted as other and foreign because it breaks societal and gender norms. Realistically, this is not going to be questioned in a society where discourse is not the normal, where mental health is not being talked about, in places like rural New Zealand, which like to not acknowledge men's mental health or mental health in general, and like to sweep these sort of things under the cover because they are uncomfortable. Making it a more casual, accessible conversation actively combats that. Why do psychologists like talking about this stuff on TikTok? They want to have legitimacy if they are like a pop psychologist, and they probably want to have more of a fan base, right? They get gains, profit, like they're profit driven too. They probably want support from like a TikTok community, and it's a good way to get your voice out there. They also just generally have empathy towards the people suffering because they're seeing these people every day. They're seeing the type of issues that they deal with, and they're also taught that kind of stuff within medical school to have like sensitivity training. But also I think they just get really frustrated if they're constantly hearing misinformation and like just fake psychology facts constantly. You're probably going to want to say, hey, you're actually just lying about that. Why do individuals who are struggling and have a diagnosis still talk about this stuff on TikTok too? They want to provide legitimate support because they understand how hard it is to deal with this sort of stuff. They want to have a community, they want to feel legitimized, and they want to change the societal perception for the better because they actively benefit from having less stigmatization for mental illness because then they face less of it. And what this means is that you're probably going to see quite open, good conversation around mental illness. Why is the content and thus the response to the content likely to be serious? We prove that both professionals and clinically diagnosed individuals have a platform and an incentive to talk. Even in your worst case of an individual faking a disorder, they are still going to highlight how hard this mental illness is because they want to have that sympathy, right? They're going to highlight the difficult aspects so that they get a conversation being like, oh, I feel so sorry for you, because ultimately that tends to be their goal. They also don't want to be getting reported or accused of lying because that takes away any benefits on profit or like any benefits on fame or like getting a GoFundMe and stuff like that. So that means that even in the instance where individuals are either incorrectly diagnosing themselves or flat out pretending to be like a mental illness, the struggles of mental illness are still being highlighted because people have an incentive to highlight those to get sympathy. I think generally when we see people suffering, the reaction to that doesn't tend to be, oh, this is funny, we should have more of this. People have empathy and can relate to individual experience, and but this only happens when we provide a platform to express the amplitude of the issues that are happening. They characterize the majority of people talking about this as an unqualified man in his basement, not created by accredited professionals. Look, I think if profit is the goal, they're not going to be getting sponsored if they are just continuously like pumping out negative content, and they're probably not going to end up being super controversial. I think people also don't believe what you're saying. If everything that you say has no legitimacy and you're making consistently illogical claims, no one's going to believe you. You're not going to be like believing in your struggle. People are also actually just going to report you if you don't have if the or hate on you if you're saying genuinely harmful stuff. This means, sure, lists of general stuff do exist, but they're not actually harmful, maybe just a bit vague. Still going to be beneficial because these general things to do, regardless of like what mental illness you have, tend to be beneficial. Like seeking out a community, talking about like support systems, saying like maybe you should exercise or sleep well. These things are generally beneficial regardless of what disorder you have. So ultimately, awful posts do end up getting reported. Professionals have legitimacy because they have a degree and people are more likely to believe them. There is diagnosis legitimacy, and yes, you can prove that you have a diagnosis because you have prescribed pills, because you attend a psychologist, because you're sharing legit stuff pretty consistently. I think it's pretty obvious you're able to prove that. So these stigmas aren't coming from nowhere. If not for these TikTok comments that the creator is getting, and other viewers are probably likely to continue, these stereotypes and mischaracterizations of mental illness, for example, like I'm so OCD, probably are going to thrive without that kind of discourse. The net result is that even though these posts are prevalent due to virality, people actually just don't believe them, and thus they don't believe the previous stigmatization. Why seeing a professional and getting a clinical diagnosis is the goal regardless of self-diagnosis. You can't get meds or structural support as easily, which I will expand on later, because you want legitimacy. People are going to believe you more when you have a clinical diagnosis to back you up. To feel acknowledged generally, it affirms your own concerns by having a medical professional support you, and because they see people with clinical diagnosis and they see the benefits of getting that kind of support. This directly contends with your content about like medicine companies providing black market drugs, because we don't believe like this is the alternative that you're going to provide. I'll take a POI now if you have one.
So, if people are making a profit, obviously doing this in real life, why do you say that there is no incentive for them to lie about this if they obviously have been making profits from it?
Okay, so I think the way in which people make profits is by making very general statements and sort of cultivating an audience based on maybe faking a disorder, but probably not faking it in a super unrealistic way. They have to have some legitimacy to their claims, and so it's probably not outlandish, the kind of stuff that they're saying, ultimately not that harmful. Being your own advocate in regards to underdiagnosed disorders is very important. Minority groups tend to not get as much research towards medical concerns, and they also tend to get their symptoms ignored because of stigmatization, and thus both societally and like therefore within medical settings, symptoms are not taken seriously or believed, and it becomes very difficult to get the help that you need. Getting diagnosed is more likely to happen when you are A, aware of what is needed clinically to get the acknowledgement, like knowing exactly what concerns to bring up with your GP in the 15-minute appointment that you have with them, knowing like what the DSM-5 is. Secondly, showing that it is possible despite the structural boundaries that are in place is going to motivate and empower you to seek that kind of support. Thirdly, it can push like these advertisers can sort of push viewers towards services which can make achieving a diagnosis or support more accessible. For example, like charities which might help contribute to you getting a diagnosis. Getting a diagnosis matters because it gives stigmatized groups legitimacy to their concerns. Secondly, it allows them to access resources and support. And thirdly, it also allows like support to make up for societal disadvantages provided, like for example, a girl with autism.
Oh, you gotta press the button. Just pull it hard. Pull it harder. Yeah. Oh no, press the button. Sorry. That's so funny. And then you pull it hard.
We thank you for this speech, and we invite the third speaker of the affirming team to continue the team's case.
are we starting in 3, 2, 1? The issue with TikTok is not that it's able to contact youth, as this is very common in the day and age where social media is so common. It is not reliable. This is unique to TikTok. TikTok has no way to validate the data. They have tried to prove that it's not. I will prove why this is true. It is also unique that it is filtered by engagement. Many other sites, news sites, resources, Reddit, whatever, they're not filtered by engagement the same way that TikTok is. TikTok is filtered by the amount of comments, the amount of likes, and all of this. Clinical diagnosis is not promoted by this algorithm. This is why they cannot win this debate. Instead, companies' ads are promoted, as are false representation of things. Now, first onto the points of clash. First of all, we have how it affects people in smaller conservative states where this is just not talked about as much. Secondly, is TikTok trustworthy? Thirdly, how the role of TikTok in accepting states, how can we get the best outcomes of this, and then just a little bit on this list. Firstly, on smaller conservative states, this has been the main push for them, saying that there is simply no way that anyone in a smaller conservative state will ever get any information about mental health apart from through TikTok. Firstly, we've told you from first that there are many other resources, especially in this day and age, to get information. We see schools, although this may not be possible in some things. We see news sites being available worldwide. We see actual reports done by psychologists that prove the impacts and the outcomes. We see literally anywhere except TikTok, like, hey, even Reddit or YouTube would be better than TikTok because people can actually link studies and sort of thing. This is exclusive to these sites. This means that TikTok cannot be used. Another thing that is super important here is that TikTok is not run by people with these conditions. Other communities are. We support people going to these other communities that are actually run by the people with these conditions who can represent it correctly and create a better outcome for everyone. It's also very common on social media to self-diagnose because the mental health system is so difficult to get a diagnosis in the current system. This is because so many people are self-diagnosing, so many people are going there with false misconceptions of what mental health actually is, and this is why we do not support it. Now, moving on to the second point of clash, arguably the most important, is TikTok trustworthy to get your information? We tell you that no, it is absolutely not. The first thing they've told us here that has really run through all of their speeches is that TikTok has been turned into some sort of educational platform. We disagree. It has been turned into a platform where people are not skeptical about things. They take things at face value. They do not do their research because they just scroll on through. So they see one thing about mental health, they get influenced by it, then they scroll on, they forget about it, but it still sticks in their mind to a certain degree. They then have a stigma that is over-normalized. People are not aware of the actual harms that are being caused by mental health issues. The second thing they told us here is that it's actually just better because it can spread awareness. We've told you from first why this awareness is actually not positive to the mental health community and how this is so detrimental for people with these terrible conditions that affect their day-to-day lives. In most cases, people are not actually presenting a full picture of their day-to-day lives with mental illness on TikTok. Often, these are done to get engagement because this is what the algorithm does. They have to present a shock factor. They have to present engagement to actually get this sort of engagement on their platforms. We also see that there is no accountability by the public. This has been their main push. TikTok is not accountable by the public. Finn has already gone over this. I'll recap it. Viewers first to get accountability, any sort of accountability on TikTok, they have to go to the comments. They have to scroll past all the comments being like, LMAO, me when I had a calculus test, or those sort of things. They have to find the few people that want to go against the grain, which is not the majority of people. The majority of people don't want to be singled out and then have hundreds of people commenting being like, hey, you're wrong, like I disagree with you because this is terrible for them. The majority agree with the post. This is why it's so over-normalized, why it's so difficult to get public accountability on TikTok because there is such a large following. Sure, blatant mistruths may be sometimes called out by the public, but the general consensus is that little underlying misinformation it will just go unnoticed. People will not go against this because it has been presented to the youth who are then influenced by it. The majority of people agree. They just like it. It gets more traction. This is just terrible overall. Yes, I'll take a POI now.
Given that TikTok virality is determined by how much discourse and disagreement is in the comments and stitches, is it not likely that people see this disagreement and thus change the misinformation?
What we see is that it's not just disagreement in the comments, it is comments in general. And what we see is a large population on youth on TikTok. What do these youth comment? They comment about relatable experiences, right? We see them going the same thing about like, oh, I get so many panic attacks from my math class. Oh, I have such bad depression. I had such a bad week because one bad thing happened. It's not just discourse. In fact, in the majority of cases, it is not discourse that creates the talk. No, moving on to the next point of clash here, which is about what it actually does in accepting states, right, where there are other ways to do this. They told us that basically without TikTok, people will never feel brave enough to like go out and like share their views. This suggests that TikTok is the only way that people actually get opinions and get engagement. We know this is not true. It is so much more accepting in many places around the world. It's taught in schools now, right? We have more research on it, more ways to get this information out in trusted news sites and reports and things that actually have accountability. And this should be the normal. We highly regret that TikTok has become the normalization of news because it is so unreliable and it presents misinformation to the youth, which is hugely important in this debate. The second thing that they told us here is that personal connection is more important than going to a psychologist. We see that personal opinions are often shared, and personal connection does not equal an accurate representation of such a harmful mental illness. That they are shared without a way to authenticate it, as we have told you, through the line. The next thing here that they told us is that it reduces stigma. We have told you from first that it reduces it to a point where it's not serious anymore, where it becomes triggering for people who see it and go, this isn't true, but they're the one among the hundreds of comments. Therefore, they feel isolated. They feel like they're not able to speak up about it because they tell their friends about it and they just don't care, right? We see medication is still a stigma. We don't see people talking about going to psych wards and this sort of thing. We just see them talking about wanting to kill themselves online or the huge panic attacks that they get. We don't see the actual harms of this coming through. Next on this is that they tried to tell us that friends will feel more qualified, right? To like help people out, that they'll be able to identify in a friend and go and help them. We see that friends feel actually way overqualified than what they are. They only see these things on TikTok because TikTok is the main source of information. Therefore, while they may have good intentions to help their friends, they will unintentionally harm them. The friends will feel worse because they can't talk to their friends about mental health. They feel bad talking to anyone about it because people feel too educated on what it's like to live like this when they cannot know, especially through TikTok, where it is presented as a shock factor to get engagement. This is worse because it creates it as a form of entertainment versus from a reputable source with research, which we would prefer on our side of the house because it would be better for everyone as a whole. Now, why do people feel isolated from their friends? Because you're having a panic attack and you say to your friend, you think you're all cool with it, right? So it's so normalized. So you say to your friend in class, hey, can you tell the teacher that like I really need to leave right now? And your friend, instead of doing the right thing because they don't know, instead they've seen all of these like breathing techniques on TikTok, right? So they just take you by the shoulders and just go, okay, just breathe with me, right? In the middle of class where everyone can see you. This is hugely damaging to people who actually have panic attacks and who have severe anxiety because, as we've told you, not everyone fits the mold that is presented on TikTok. In fact, the majority do not fit the mold. And then just moving on finally to their split about being your own advocate and being able to self-diagnose and how this really helps majority groups. First of all, over and over again, we've told you TikTok is not the only resource. There are many other places run by communities that actually represent mental health as it should be said. And secondly, here we see that with such large groups of people discussing this, right, people are not taking seriously when they go to a doctor because they've seen it on TikTok. They don't actually have a full picture of what it's like. They have a very narrow view. Therefore, they're taken to doctors who just dismiss them for being rude and just like not really knowing what mental health actually is. This is why we need to regret TikTok, why it has been so detrimental to everyone in society. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, and we welcome up the third speaker of the debate to close out the substantive portion of the debate.
Look, panel. TikTok allows mental illnesses to be part of a light-hearted conversation. It allows it, it destigmatizes it, it shows people how to cope and what to do. Comparatively, you have an 87-year-old grandma going into classrooms saying mental health issues is bad, you should just sort of find ways to cope with it, right? That's what comparative stands for. An unrecognizable old woman who you don't associate with telling you about mental health issues. So harmful, we actually tell the youth what to do about it, how to cope. Two questions then in today's debate. Firstly, on what this narrative looks like, and secondly then on on how people react to a narrative. Note, I've put what narrative looks like first, because if we prove that this narrative is good, it actually sparks conversation. We win. The second point is just about margin building, how we create community. So, what have we heard from opposition on this first question of what narrative looks like? The first push we heard was that people with mental health issues are seen as like less serious when it's on TikTok. My first response is I'm going to flip this, right? Because it's actually a really good thing when people like talk about this, because it like destigmatizes it, right? No, because before TikTok, often mental health issues were like this vague thing that nobody really like understood the intricacies of, right? What TikTok created is like people who are suffering with them, showing them their day-to-day struggles, showing them that you don't have to like walk around the street naked to have like a mental health issue. You can be like someone who's struggling in their day-to-day life. That is what is being shown on TikTok through this narrative. Like, it's easier to like come forward if it's been normalized, right? No, it's really hard to come forward when it's just like an old teacher telling you about it, because you don't feel like you're part of that group. You don't feel like you can come forward because it's seen as this vague thing. My second response is like, people are still likely to treat it with empathy, right? If they see somebody struggling on TikTok who are like struggling to live their day-to-day life, they're not going to be like, haha, lol, I'm just going to skip to a cat video. They're likely to have some empathy, right? Most people have some empathy to be kind to other people. Therefore, that they're likely to treat it with the seriousness that it actually deserves. We start this conversation. Thirdly, it's just like what this narrative actually looks like is somebody saying, here's the problem, here's what you can do about it, right? That's the incentive, because they've probably lived with the mental health issues. They probably had to deal with it through their youth by themselves. No, we get them away in their incentive to show them how to actually live with that, how to survive that. Fourthly, it's just like when somebody sees us on TikTok and they're like, oh, what is depression? They're likely to then go and search it up, right? They're not likely just to believe every single thing they believe on TikTok, because they probably want more information. They search it up online. Really key benefit we get, people engaging, destigmatizing it, and going into more depth. The second claim then we heard from opposition was that TikTok has no guideline. False information will get passed and people will use it as clout. Four main responses. First, it's just like, I think it's simply untrue, right? Because if somebody was pushed like such a false narrative, TikTok will ban it, right? They've got like community guidelines. If it's like that bad, they're likely to be like, oh, that's probably like, we should get that off our platform. Second, it's just like, as Zoe like so wonderfully said, there's probably a huge community, right? Because mental health issues has like 1 million people following the hashtag, right? Therefore, if they post something that's like really radically wrong, then there's like comment sections are likely to be like hate comments, like, well, hold on a second, that's not actually true representation. What true representation is X, Y, Z, right? That's really key, because they show them what the representation looks like, because they've got such a good community. Thirdly, it's even if there is some misinformation, like the breathing techniques, we think breathing techniques are actually kind of like a good thing, right? Because to breathe probably helps lots of mental health issues, right? And like, for example, exercise, which is a common thing that is people are told people to do, it's probably a good thing for depression, right? You get out of your head. So like, even these like misinformation things they get through aren't actually misinformation. They still help you in the long run get through your mental health issues. And just like fourthly, it's just like, as Giovanni said, they won't use this clout because obviously they'll be cancelled by the community. Nobody wants to be cancelled. They're likely to do a good representation. This looks like Uncle Tix. This looks like people actually showing what mental health issues actually look like. Thirdly then is opposition gave us this comparative, right? They see issues they want to see issues getting discussed in a serious manner. You get info from schools and psychologists. My first response is just simply, as Giovanni said, this relies on the schools having a good incentive, right? Because there's no global community behind the schools to like hold them accountable. Therefore, if you've got a teacher who doesn't really care about mental health issues, like just like saying, oh yeah, depression is a thing, like read this PowerPoint, right? That's not very like personable. You don't relate to that information. Probably really harmful, because somebody in the back of the room who's probably not listening because they're so depressed, right? Doesn't listen to it, gets no help. Harmful. Secondly, it's just like, it's harmful when you only get information from like an old lady who has like a PhD, or like your PE teacher, because like they're unrelatable. It feels super serious and you feel like it's a problem, right? They're making a whole lesson about why mental health issues is a problem, why it should be like, you should deal with it really seriously. Comparatively, you have a light-hearted conversation that be like, if you think you've got a mental health issue, here's some coping mechanism, here is why you should go to a therapist, right? That's the narrative that is portrayed on our side of the house. That is what opposition has to engage with. Thirdly, it's just that like there's a limited time at school, right? You've got like 55 minutes. They're not going to go through like the hundreds of mental health issues, right? If you've got like someone that's not very popular, you won't get that in schools. No, you'll probably get that on TikTok, because there's probably other people with it. They're likely to post about it. You're likely to see it because it'll be like given to you by the algorithms. Therefore, even if you've got this like really rare mental health issue, you're likely to see it on our side. You're likely to get coping mechanisms and see how people live with it. It's just like, fourthly, when like a teacher talks about it, there's less representation, right? Because if it's like a teacher being like, this is depression, it's like you don't get as much representation and intricacies. Whereas if it's on TikTok, it's like men can have depression too. Men can go through all these things, which is really stigmatized in our society. They have to break that on opposition side. They don't break that norm. That is simply why we get that benefit, because we show you that every single person can live with mental health issues. That is a clear claim. Lastly, Jen, they just talked about how it's like a false representation of mental health issues. First is it just starts conversations, right? Because when you say like, this is what depression looks like, people start talking about it, people Google it, right? So at the end of this point, I've proven to you that firstly, the representation is likely to be really good because there's lots of accountability, there's guidelines. Second is that like people will engage with it, they're likely to find ways to cope with it or to search up online. At the end of this, I think we've won today's debate. I'm then going to margin build. I'll quickly take a BYB while I drink a glass of water.
Yeah, how does your side get the right people into psychologist's office instead of mentally well people seeking diagnosis?
Well, it's actually okay if mentally okay people go to take a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist who's like, you probably don't have depression. They're like, okay, whoopsies, my fault. But no, we still get the people who may have it, like on the borderline, going into these psychiatrists. That's probably really good because that means we really help those people who really need help, right? That's a trade-off we're willing to make. Cool. Now for the second question on how people react. No, this is second. Doesn't really matter because we've already won today's debate. This is sort of margin building. The first thing we heard that like people won't get treated as it's not normalized to get treatment on these TikTok videos. First, just like when TikTok are posted, there's an incentive to show how to get help. Either firstly, A, where it's like the person is showing you how they deal with mental health issues in their day, how they get along with it and cope with it. Or B, there's like a comment section full of coping mechanisms, full of resources where you can go to, full of people telling you you should probably go to a psychiatrist. You build a connection, you build a community, really good for these people who are struggling and are told that they're not okay on opposition side. The second thing we heard is that kids can just go online. They can search things up. First, it's just like, we can have kids go online too. That's not mutually exclusive, right? If they see they've got, like, if they see, like, the thing that TikTok does is it starts a conversation. It just shows people that, like, mental health issues is a thing that most people face. Like, if they think they've got depression, they'll probably just search it up. And therefore, they're more likely to, like, relate to it, right? They're more likely to, like, have a connection and know that it's not, like, some like, vague thing that people can have. They're likely to believe that they could have it. They searched up online. Online shows them they should go to a psychiatrist. Probably really good that people go to a psychiatrist if they need the help. The second claim we heard it second was that companies are profit incentives and like they'll just create a whole bunch of false medication. Firstly, just like as Jiminy said, fake medication is like a violation. I don't think they can really like claim that. I'm still not going to spend much time on it. And secondly, I'm actually going to flip it, right? Because when people like go to these companies and go to psychiatrists, it's actually a really good thing whether they have it or not, because that means the people who don't have the mental health issues are told, you're okay, you know you can do this, you're just going through a tough time in your life. But the people who do have mental health issues are given a diagnosis, given ways to cope with it, given medication that they strategically need to live their life. The last thing we heard is that like 20 seconds can't show intricacies of a mental health issue, but first it just starts a conversation. It creates people, like personable people to look up to, your idols. At the end of this debate, what have I proven? Firstly, is that this narrative is likely to be serious, it's likely to be normalized, people can talk about it, it destigmatizes mental health issues. Secondly, people engage with it in a good way. They go on Google, they search it up because they now relate to it. It's not this vague teacher talking to them, right? Because that's what opposition stands for. Your teacher standing up in the front of the room for 20 minutes telling you about mental health issues, they go through 3 of them, they drop it. We stand for billions of people who really care about you, have an incentive to show you how to live, showing you how to cope, showing you where to get help, right? Because that's an incentive. They've lived with it. Those are the people we really help under status quo. That's who we are looking forward to. That is why we win today's debates. Proud to be there.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and I invite the leader of the Negating team to give their reply.
Look, the crux of today's debate is whether TikTok supports or declines the seriousness of mental health issues. On our side of the house, we have been offering so many such good analysis about why we are seeing a large engagement of mental health videos on TikTok, and why this engagement actually sees us supporting the mental health movement a lot more than the negating side. We offer a larger spread of awareness because of TikTok's large reach and good engagement it offers. Now, not only does this awareness spread to people who are struggling, but we've also pointed out that it spreads to people who aren't struggling and can offer their support and offer someone to be someone that people lean on. The impacts of this are people are feeling more comfortable expressing who they are, being able to come forward to get the help that they need. We recognize that TikTok is not the end or be all. We don't go on there and go, I have depression now, that's the end of the case. We recognize that the ultimate goal is to get people to feel comfortable in who they are, feel connected with their mental illness in a way that they feel comfortable going forward and asking for that further help, for that diagnosis, for that support from the professionals. We have clearly showed that TikTok can offer so many different avenues for this. It can show that because of the way that the algorithm is set up, you can clearly get that kind of high level of engagement through a lot of different things, through hashtags, through comments, through just the views and stitches and duets of videos. Their case has largely revolved around the harms of TikTok, which they've said things like misinformation is being spread, but we've disproved this by stating that lots of viewers, at least 1 in a million, is going to say, hey, you're wrong, like that's not right, especially especially when a large amount of these viewers are people struggling with mental illnesses. They've also said things like it makes mental illnesses less seriousness through the normalization, but we've combated this saying the normalization is what we need to be able to have these conversations and have people struggling actually feel comfortable having these conversations. Without that normalization, we're back in a box where it's like, I'm depressed, I can't talk about it, I'm anxious, I feel like I don't have a space anymore. TikTok is that space. They aren't showing us sufficient examples that will spread awareness and support the mental health movement to the same extent as TikTok. They've given us things like a school psychologist or like a website, but these things don't have the engagement that TikTok does. You're not telling me 1 million people go to your school and go to your school counselor. No, they don't. They've also said things that this is a form of entertainment, which makes it less serious, but we pointed out that TikTok has manifested into so many different things since its creation. Now moving on, I'd like to point out that we have Okay, sorry. No. So we get a sense of community on our side of the house that is mutually exclusive because of that high engagement and because of people being able to connect to the idea. They can connect to people that are posting, and they can also get that connection from people reviewing their TikToks. This allows for people to have more of a connection, which we've identified that it is so important for people to have some kind of person to lean on. They need that support, especially when you're struggling with mental illness, and we offer that exclusively on our side of the house. Their side mainly has things like we offer support for people that are struggling, but they aren't offering the information being spread to others, which is necessary for people to understand and be able to create a better community for people with mental illness to live in. The outcomes of all of this is that people will feel less lonely and isolated, and this is so significant, as I said before, because that is what people with mental health issues need to push through, to persevere, and to live a life where they can actually sustain themselves and not suffer from this mental illness anymore. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and welcome up the leader of the affirming team to finish today's debate.
Four questions for the House, 4 questions for today's debate. These questions are, firstly, who gets better normalisation? Secondly, who gets better outcomes for actual unwell people? Thirdly, what are the alternatives to TikTok? And fourthly, is TikTok valid as an information source, as a diagnosis, and as a platform? Look, firstly, who achieves better normalisation? We think it's really important to set aside and note right now that more normalisation does not equal better normalisation. At Stella, at myself, at Riley, we told you exactly how normalisation can sometimes come from people with the best of intentions, but not be executed correctly in a manner to actually provide the best support for these people. So even if the opposition today can show that they get better normalisation, and I'll tell you why I don't think they can, what this normalisation is contingent on is the validity of TikTok as an information place and the outcomes for unwell people being contingent on normalisation. Look, we don't think they get normalization when they bring up the example of like, oh, it's actually always a good thing, even if it's lighthearted, it just removes stigma. We gave you a world in which this thing is so normalized that we type kill myself on a daily basis. Like this just shows that it is not taken seriously, it is not given the brevity that it deserves to have, and therefore we see worse outcomes on their side of the house for mentally unwell people. Look, secondly, who on the house actually gets better outcomes for unwell people? NEG is correct when they say that diagnoses can't be misinformed. While this is true, we tell you more importantly that NEG doesn't get the people who need it actually in a psychologist's office. By their own concession, they say that the mental health system is stretched at best. 3 reasons why we told you that NEG doesn't actually get the right people in the psychologist's office. Right, so firstly, with this normalization that they hung their entire hat on, we tell you that you're just going to get people who are mentally well, who really want to be mentally unwell for reasons like we told you, like clout, attention, even financial gain. A diagnosis is really important to them, right? So they are going to be flooding the psychologist's office trying to get a diagnosis. What happens when they don't get it? NEG said like they're just going to go, whoops, my bad, I don't have depression, and they'll just go back to their life. We tell you that when you go and get told that you're wrong, you become isolated, you become scared about it, you begin to have this resentment of the system. What this means is that instead of just conceding that you're wrong, you'll go back to TikTok and you say, oh yeah, they refuse to diagnose me, don't trust the state guys, I'm self-diagnosed, I still have this mental illness, I still deserve the support for it. Right, so thirdly, what are the alternatives to TikTok? Look, I think blatantly, opposition today loses the debate when they say that the alternatives to TikTok in 2023 are jail and a crusty old health teacher who will come into your school, name like 3 different mental illnesses, and then just leave. We think that this is a completely baseless characterization, not one that actually gets better outcomes for the people who need it on their side of the house. We told you that this looks like media, news, movies, and YouTube. It's not enough for them to simply come out and say, oh yeah, jail or whatever, that's what we had before TikTok, I don't know, I can't remember, and old health teachers. Finally, is TikTok valid? Because yes, even if they can prove that they get better engagement, better normalization, I've shown you they can't, all of this is contingent on good validity of information. Right, from the start, we said TikTok is not accountable. Even if we get, what we heard from them is that the presence of these experts and people with lived experience could just completely counter this. Even if we buy the presence of these people, in the opposition's very best case, information validity on their biggest platform comes from 2 people fighting it out in a comment section. We told you neither of these people can be trusted, and therefore we cannot trust any information on TikTok. We heard a last-minute push that TikTok spreads on discourse. Right at Stella, we gave you the response that actually no, it spreads on comments. And what do these comments look like? We have told you throughout our case, you're more likely to get literally me, skull emoji, than you are to get, actually, that's not true. This is a really delicate and sincere issue, guys. Even by their own concession, they said that these comments ratios would be like 1 in a million. So therefore, most importantly, when opposition gives no exclusive attributes to TikTok that give them benefits and cannot prove the validity of any engagement they claim, they lose today's debate and they lose these points. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and I thank my friends for an excellent debate. I invite you to cross the floors and shake hands, and then if everyone can please exit the room so that the panel can adjudicate.
Good job, guys. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
You did amazing. Well done.
You too. Great job.
Well done.
You did great.
You did amazing.
Turning back and
Oh, I like my number.